Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines has always held an extremely special place in both my heart and personal gaming history. Alongside 2002's Neverwinter Nights, it's basically what turned me into such a die-hard fan of both TTRPGs and CRPGs in equal measure. So needless to say, you can count me among the thousands of us who have been waiting impatiently and a bit nervously for Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. Fortunately, I think the wait was mostly worth it. Though I wouldn't call Bloodlines 2 a great game per se, I had a really great time playing it. For better or worse, it retains a lot of Bloodlines DNA. Though not as nitty-gritty or RPG heavy as its predecessor, it still largely feels the same to play. However, it also carries with it some jank and technical issues that really do make it feel like an early aughts title. And while some of these issues were humorous or even slightly endearing, I was less than thrilled about the numerous game crashes and a game-breaking glitch I stumbled upon. Yet when I could seamlessly play, I truly enjoyed the overall experience. Bloodlines 2 does not operate at the same level of sheer abundance and choice as a lot of modern-day RPGs. However, its streamlined approach isn't necessarily a bad thing considering just how wonderful the game's narrative and characters are. I never got over the thrill of stealthily eliminating an entire room of baddies with my elder vampire powers, or just how paralyzing it can be to make a dialogue choice that will ultimately seal which of the game's endings you're locked into. Though Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 might not offer a deep RPG experience, it's certainly a bloody fun time. Bloodlines 2 makes the inspired decision to have you play as an elder vampire, one roughly 150 years older than the United States. The game's events kick off shortly after you awaken from a century-long torpor, think of that as a vampire hibernation of sorts, with an all-consuming urge to feed and a mysterious disembodied voice in your head. That mysterious disembodied voice belongs to Fabian, a vampire detective who was turned in the 1920s and also has no idea why you two appear to be sharing a body and consciousness. This kicks off the first of the game's many mysteries, which see you play through 3 different timelines as you try to piece together what's happening to you, Fabian, the rapidly dying Camarilla, or Vampire Court, and the city of Seattle. The ensuing adventure is one full of political intrigue and twists that, while not entirely unexpected, still deliver and delight. Though it's certainly not the first game to explore the freedom versus security dichotomy, or how so many are willing to endure broken systems when resisting them is seen as uncomfortable or inconvenient, it does so with adequate skill and plenty of flourish. A large part of what makes Bloodlines 2 truly shine, however, is its characters. Considering Fabian is both the person you are around the most and is essentially a 1920s detective archetype, it would be all too easy for him to be insufferable. But even with those qualities and the fact that he serves as the game's comic relief, he's actually really well written and, dare I say it, endearing.
Computers. Mostly, they're like a very fast telegraph system staffed by idiots. My advice is to leave well alone.
All of Bloodlines 2's characters are caricatures of a sort, but evolved and far more well-rounded. Lou Graham, the former vampire prince of Seattle, for example, is an aristocratic narcissist, but there's still a part of her that feels really human, understandable, and pitiable even. The Camarilla's current prince, Raomi, tries her hardest to maintain a tough-as-nails facade, yet is obviously struggling with her rise to power and how to bridge her idealism with her pragmatism. And despite there being so many other characters well worth mentioning, I'd be remiss not to bring up Tully. As in Nosferatu, Tully no longer possesses conventional good looks, having lost that part of his humanity in his transformation. This is touched upon in a really interesting way, as it's revealed that while he used to be more concerned with his appearance, living through the 80s as a gay man has simply left him happy to still be here. I was consistently impressed by stories like these and the amount of thoughtfulness and compassion that went into constructing these characters. I finished the game eager to play it again and learn even more about them. Also, because I know you're thinking it, yes, you can romance these characters, though it is admittedly a pretty shallow feature.
One or more intimate acts between us.
Despite absolutely loathing Fire's name, I actually really loved them as a character as well. Even after 45 hours of playing, I never tired of hearing their cliched and vaguely Romanian accent, and the subtle but persistent way they just don't get certain parts of modern living. And that Fire is a pre-established and somewhat dark character with this storied past that people know about, for better or worse.
You're the nomad.
Huh. Guess word gets around.
There's so much more than an everyman with a chip on their shoulder and the desire to kiss and or kill everyone, and it makes for a far more interesting experience overall. That said, I think one downside to the emphasis on Fire's backstory is that it draws even more attention to how disappointingly little Fire's clan affiliation matters. Outside very slightly altering the ways that some characters talk to you and determining which abilities you start out with, I found that the clan I chose had no real impact on gameplay. All clan-specific abilities and outfits can be unlocked later down the road simply by talking to other characters, regardless of what you choose at the beginning. But I'll admit it, the fact that you can attain all combat abilities was a great decision. Whereas the game's basic melee-focused combat is relegated to simply hitting R1 to attack and L1 to dodge, the game's abilities completely transform what would otherwise be an extremely dull affair. Regardless of class, Fire is given telekinetic abilities, which can be used in battle to push and pull enemies or fetch and use weapons. But beyond that, each vampire is also allowed to utilize 4 greater powers as well. Some of these are pretty macabre, such as the one that commands an enemy to, I'll phrase this delicately, take care of themselves, and another that makes their blood literally boil. Others, like possess and mass manipulation, are simply devious. When strung together, these skills make for gameplay that is extremely fun, regardless of if you're approaching things more head-on or more stealthily. Of course, these powerful abilities require that you are regularly consuming blood, be it from enemies while fighting, pedestrians, or blood packs. But by the time I reached the game's final chapters, I was blown away by how easily and gracefully I could take down an entire building full of enemies. I truly cannot understate how great it felt, time after time. Traversal is another important part of Bloodline 2's core gameplay loop, and it too feels very similarly fast-paced and fluid. Early on, Fabian remarks that he'll never get tired overseeing a flying vampire after seeing the way in which Fire's elder status allows her to glide over the city. And honestly, same. It's a rush getting in that groove and seamlessly bounding and gliding between buildings. Though I will admit that the game's own clunkiness can make these mad dashes a bit unwieldy at times. All that said, it becomes unfortunate that Bloodline 2's overall structure doesn't do much to heighten the joy of roaming about the city or incentivize players to do so. While there are collectibles scattered about Seattle and rudimentary side quests, by and large it is an incredibly linear game that tasks you with running back and forth between the same handful of locations.
Be careful with this one. A delicate package to Westlake Memorial Hall.
Side quests are largely inconsequential, and thus getting to know these city blocks feels pretty inconsequential as well. It's somewhat of a shame that exploration and curiosity isn't fostered purely because of how detailed and lovely this small piece of city is. I adored wandering around Pioneer Square as a grungy-sounding motif slowly built up around me, moonlight and street lamps refracting on the freshly fallen snow, and I was delighted by how certain places are very clearly inspired by real-world Seattle locations, with the most notable of these being the entrance to the city's infamous underground. Less polished, however, is Bloodlines 2 as a whole, and that is perhaps its biggest downfall. While playing on my PS5, I experienced around 7 or so crashes. My colleague playing on PC reported at least 2. At one point, I was rendered unable to play the game for days because I had been inexplicably locked out of a room I needed to get into to turn in a quest. I tried countless things before eventually loading up a much earlier save and replaying an hour or 2 of the game to get back to the same spot. Thankfully, that did the trick. Enemies often defied physics, fire frequently clipped through walls, and NPCs behaved in some truly asinine ways at times. Whenever I accidentally broke the Masquerade, meaning I did something decidedly vampiric in front of a human audience, thus threatening to reveal our kind, it was treated with less urgency than you'd think it'd necessitate. I'd simply skulk away somewhere, wait for a bit, and then resume what I was doing. Sometimes all of this made the game incredibly funny and added some charm. Other times, not so much. This more or less reflects Bloodlines 2 as a whole. Sometimes charming, other times not so much. There's a lot there that is great. I love the narrative, the characters, the drama, and the sheer power fantasy of it all. At the same time, it's one of the more unpolished games I've ever reviewed, and definitely lacks the same level of ambition, scope, choice, and general tightness of other RPGs. Oftentimes, I found myself thinking it's a great game in spite of itself, which ultimately only makes it a pretty good game.